Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday and welcome to the Qdabra webinar. My name is Hilary Stoupa and I'm a developer with Qdabra software as well as an InfoPath MVP. And today we are going to be talking about, among other things, using multiple SharePoint lists to store form data with qRules. So our webinar goals in general are to be relevant. We want to make sure what we're saying is important to you. You can use the feedback form to guide us. We want to be low impact in terms of how much of your time we take. I confess in advance that there's likelihood I will take more of your time than I intend because I always just have so much stuff I want to show people. The demos are live. If something blows up, bear with me. Please be patient. And if you want to get us your contact info, we will get you the demo forms, the slides, and we've got some documentation on how to use the demo forms in your environment. We'll package all that stuff up and get it to you along with a link to a recording of this. So to start with, the idea about InfoPath and SharePoint, the concepts of InfoPath plus SharePoint, it all seems like it should be super easy. Everything should just work, right? And it really is if you're living in demo land or quick tutorial land where all data is flat. The fact of the matter is, though, that almost no business data is actually flat. Almost all business data is interconnected, right? If your business data is entirely flat, that's probably a topic for a whole nother webinar. And let's pop back to this one more time. The screenshot here is of the very familiar, hopefully to everyone, Northwind database that used to come with Access prior to AdventureWorks when things got really complicated. And we'll be looking at Northwind data today simply because it's clean, it's simple, and we all kind of know it. So your out-of-the-box options with InfoPath and SharePoint. You could do a SharePoint list form using InfoPath to customize that list form. And I've seen some extremely nice looking and well done SharePoint list forms. The nice things about it, of course, is that integration is pretty seamless. There's no real burden on the form developer. It's pretty straightforward to publish. It's pretty straightforward to edit these things. It integrates nicely with the existing site. Nice user experience for your users. Everything feels familiar there. The cons are, of course, you cannot add code to a list form, no matter what. I don't care how badly you want to. It's just simply not possible. And I'm not a big proponent for adding code to forms, but that lack of flexibility can be a drawback. No complex data structures. You can't put any repeating tables in there. Your list form, needless to say, is tightly bound to your list, and so trying to move things around becomes instantly more complex. Another out-of-the-box option is using an InfoPath form that just has promoted and demoted properties. You publish it to a library. It has a submit connection back to that same library. You know, when I started using InfoPath, I cannot tell you how many times I was utterly baffled by the fact that I had to publish to the library first, get the library URL, then set up the submit connection to the same library. And if I moved to the form, I had to go through those steps again. It was a bit of a struggle for me at first to kind of grok that entire concept set. But it is pretty easy to publish, and if you demote properties, you know, you mark that when you promote them in the publish process, you mark that little checkbox to allow certain fields to be edited from the list. That allows you to edit in datasheet view. Of course, you know, be careful with that because your rules aren't going to fire, right? Obviously, rules fire when fields change. And if the user's changing data in the list, it's not like the form logic's going to run. So you want to keep an eye out for what types of fields you demote. But again, like I talked about, you know, if you move this form, you've got to go through the whole set up your submit connection again. Or you could add some code or some qRules magic or whatever to auto-update that via form logic, but then that makes it a little more complex. And your repeating data can only be promoted in an aggregated fashion. So we've already kind of touched on the fact that most likely in the real world your data is going to have some repeating structures, and honestly they're going to be nested. Really, they are. And you know, we can only aggregate things if we're publishing things up, or we can merge them in terms of a sum. We can also pick first and last, which I don't I don't know about you. For me, first and last, I don't find that terribly meaningful in general. There are occasions when they are. But you've got to watch out for your data types. I mean, just Monday or Tuesday when I was setting up my demo form for the first demo, I was like, oh, well, I'll just, demonstrate this by promoting all these different fields, and I'll just merge them. And, of course, I couldn't promote my date field because the data type doesn't allow for merging. And I don't know about you, but if I have a date, I want to store it as a date. I'm not all that interested in storing my dates as strings because I lose a lot of the functionality that you get when you store your data type as the correct thing. So yeah, that was a little. I said, oh, there's another thing that doesn't work the way I'd expect it. And of course, there is the good old-fashioned basing your form off the database approach if you want to get your data into SQL for reporting because it's more complex. And these are persnickety. You're not going to have any luck with the submit and IPFS. It's tightly coupled to the database. I put this slide in at the last minute simply because I thought to myself, well, we should at least mention database-bound forms. But frankly, I avoid them as if they were a crime scene. And I think for most people that would be the right approach. So I'm a qRules fangirl, kind of, because I'm a qRules developer, and it's sort of my little pet kitten, and I adore it. But you can do all of the things that qRules does with custom code. The things you're going to run into if you take a custom code approach, and I'm not anti-code, I'm a dev, I love code, it's my best friend. But the things you're going to run into if you take a custom code approach is you either need a developer, somebody who does write code for a living, or you need to be, adventurous and willing to kind of work through the process of learning how to write the code yourself. One problem we see with forms with code is sometimes the form developer who created the form and wrote the code went on to a different organization and never left the source code files any place anyone could find them. And you need those source code files if you're going to add to the functionality. And a lot of times custom code is not written with reusability or flexibility in mind. Now, if you've especially if you're someone who you've just kind of picked it up on your own and you've been working through it on your own, reusability and flexibility probably aren't concepts that are high on your priority list because you're just figuring out how to get the form to do what you want. And so it's not a criticism to say that that hasn't been taken into account with custom code in a form. It's just to bring up the fact that if you do decide to take a custom code approach, I wholeheartedly encourage you to work towards reusability and flexibility so that you aren't having to write the same code just lightly modified again and again and again for the same form. Okay, so that's just kind of a little, aside and caveat. With qRules, if you use qRules, you can use it to submit your form data, flat data or repeating data, to one or more SharePoint lists. Now, we know that the data in a SharePoint list is pretty flat. And you've got lookup columns. You can click on those to pop open your related item. However, once you submit your data that is in, for example, a nested repeating XML structure to a number of lists, you have built yourself a little SharePoint relational database, frankly. I mean, it's the same kind of structure if you've got a number of related lists that you would see if you had built up your database in tables in SQL. SharePoint has, in my opinion, more challenges for reporting on that data than you would have in SQL. But for a lot of people, this will take care of their general reporting needs in that their users are going to be pretty comfortable just going to the different views and sorting, parsing, or creating their own custom views. And of course you can use SSRS, Crystal, enterprise tools like that to report on your SharePoint list. If you use qRules, you can make your form pretty easy to move, and I'll point out a couple things in the demo that will hopefully help with that. And of course, unlike a SharePoint list form, you get the full InfoPath Designer experience. The cons, hey, if this is a browser form, qRules is code. I mean, we know it's easier and more reusable than custom code, but the fact is it's code. You have to be, if you're going to publish your form directly to a library, you have to be a site collection admin. The same rules apply that would apply if you had written custom code. If your form is, if you're not a site collection admin, if you're not going to sandbox, you have to admin approve that form. There's a learning curve with qRules. I'd like to pretend like there isn't, but there is, and so there's kind of that getting over the initial hump. I see, like I said, a lot of familiar names. I know some of you have already gotten past that. And the IPFS issues, the InfoPath Form services that sometimes occur in forms with code that are environmental, that are based on your particular server, they can be a little tricky, and that's why I include, learn the log file location or make friends with your SharePoint admin if you're not, if you don't have access to that server, because generally speaking, those SharePoint diagnostic logs can really help work through issues. And then finally, in this third little demo that I'm going to show you just shows some queries on DBXL. And again, just for completeness, I want to mention that if you use a custom web service, a web service you've written, another web service, or our DBXL web service, you can usually use web services to query data into your form, and our DBXL web service also submits data back to SQL databases, which again exposes data for reporting, but it does require a server install and a license and those things. And the reason I keep kind of talking about all of this in terms of reporting is that's the whole reason we care about getting the data back out, right? It's real straightforward to create a form and let your users fill it out, and then you are sitting there and you've got 800 XML, and they've got nested repeating data, and the CFO is like, hey, I'm so glad you took on this form project. Now, can I please get a summary of the latest item for each customer that exposes the product they ordered most? And that's when, your head slowly leans down and hits your desk, because it's like, well, it's in a nested repeated XML file. How do I get it out? And data is only as valuable as what we can learn from it. Data on its own, sitting in a store someplace, is not of any value. Data just collected is potential knowledge, but that's all it is. It's not actual knowledge until we can expose it in a way that allows people to make valuable decisions on it. Okay, and so when you think about the reporting options, I guess the things I think are important to keep in mind, and you guys are probably like, is she going to shut up and do the demos? But I'm going to get there in just a second. The things that are important to me to keep in mind are the people who are going to be looking at the reports and the people who are actually going to be creating the reports. There are certain types of reports that should only be created by somebody with a deep familiarity with the data, or if you're working with a very large data set or a data set that has challenging joins. The thing that comes to my mind is like a typical DB2 J.D. Edwards data set where you've got a cajillion rows, the joins are not intuitive, and you cannot just simply expose that data set to Jim over in finance and say, dude, here's the data set, get through it, get what you want out of there, right? Because he could be potentially creating views that have incorrect information. So for your flat stuff that's in your, for your related SharePoint lists, your users who understand the data, your business users who have the knowledge, they can use Excel or Access to quickly kind of connect this information together and learn things from it. And that is fantastic reporting for those users. If you're in a situation where your data is hard to connect, it's difficult, or it's a large data set, SSRS or Crystal reports, I know with reporting services you can create like data connection libraries, and then you can say to your analysts, your business analysts, you can say, hey, go to town, build your reports, here's your library of data connections, right? So you're covered. You know that the data is protected from any big drags. And then there's also things like Performance Point and Power Pivot. And we're going to talk more about reporting on the 516 webinar. So be sure you come for that if reporting's of interest to you. So I'm going to pop over here and show a demo, and let me see if I can do this without making too much of a disaster. Okay, so I think I've got this little attendee view that shows me hopefully what you guys are seeing, and I have to check it a lot of times because I don't feel super confident that I'm showing what I think I'm showing. So I've got 3 demos. This first one is super quick. This is a customer feedback form. And I'm just going to pop it open in design mode here. And it's pretty straightforward. We've got some customer information. We've got some feedback information. And this form is set to submit to a SharePoint library. And it's got some promoted columns. And those promoted columns include not date, of course, because I couldn't merge that, but feedback type, who it was taken by, and the comments. And so if we go look in that library, so I'm going to knock this down in size just a little bit. Now this is a site that is created off of a Northwind site template. It is fantastic, and if you've been to one of my things before, you've seen Northwind before, you've probably seen it in my blog posts. I love this. I have this site template, and when I make a mess of one of my Northwind sites, I blow it away and I bring on a clean one, which I did for this presentation. And so you can find this template online. If you ask us for the demo forms, we include documentation on setting them up, and one of the documents includes information on where to find this site and how to set it up in your environment so you can use it. So here's my customer feedback library that I published my form to, and I filled one out and submitted it. And we're going to wait and wait and wait for this to pop open because I wanted to show you kind of what the data looks like, and then you can see sort of the issue that I'm talking about here. So now obviously if I had 15 or 20 of these, I could sort them by modified by or by name, address or city or zip or country. All of this data is nicely flat. But this data you can see is not so flat. These are my my comments that I typed in. And then these are the types, and in one of them I didn't select a type, so you can see there's a blank there. And here's who they were taken by. So let's just say that you've got this form, and you need to figure out all the customers who've left positive feedback and all the customers who've left negative feedback. And you've got this single form because you want one form per customer so that when you open the form, you can see all of the feedback that a customer's ever given, which is sort of nice for your user. You can just go find this customer's form, you open it up, you see all the feedback in historical array. But you can see if you want to report on that feedback and you're just submitting it to a SharePoint library, you're gonna run into some trouble. So the next sample is the one we're going to look at a little bit more in depth. And this one is, I'm just going to pop this open in design mode. This one is a kind of a customer's orders and orders details form. And in this form I'm using qRules. And this one both can query data from SharePoint and submit data back to SharePoint. And it submits to a variety of lists. You can guess by looking at this which lists I'm submitting to: customers, orders, and order details. And in this form, it could definitely use a little more conditional formatting to hide some things until it was selected. But my thought was, we can select a customer, and then we can either select from an original order and edit it or update it, or we can create a new order by leaving that order number blank. And I'm just using qRules here to allow myself to either update existing items or submit new items. So if I took this particular order, and I have to write down the order number because maybe numbers stick in other people's brains, but in my brain you put a number in there and all the digits fly around and then I never know what order they were supposed to go in originally. So I'm going to add to this order just, blah, blah. And there we've got it added to. So I have added to this particular order, and I'll submit it. And then we'll go take a look at the details for it here. We pop back over into our order details. And I'm just going to sort by order number. And it was 10538. See, I'd already forgotten it. I had to go look at my notepad. 10538. Oh, sorry. And again, 5 is a bigger number than 2. There it is. Okay. So now you all know one of my weaknesses. Don't give me numbers. It'll lose me. So here's my new order, and it's got the additional details in it. And so what I've got going on here, really, there's nothing that special in the form. You'll see it if you get the demo forms. What I'm doing here is basically, if I select a company, I get some specific data for the customer. Hey, if you started out with an earlier version of InfoPath in 2010, and if you're now using InfoPath 2010 and SharePoint 2010, be sure you pay attention to the fact, I'm sorry, now I'm up on my soapbox. Be sure you pay attention to the fact that we now have query fields on our SharePoint list connections. So with 2007, you had to pull in all the data. With 2010, if you're using SharePoint list data, you now have query fields. There's simple equivalency. You can't get too complicated in those queries, but if you've got simple equivalency queries where you want X equals Z and Y equals M, then they're absolutely fantastic to get back just the data you need. So do keep those in mind. So I'm getting data for just this specific customer, and I'm setting all of these fields for them. And I'm also querying to get just their orders. And if you select an order, I'm populating this order stuff. And I am using qRules to, create this repeating table. Insert the right number of rows. My submit command itself, I've got a little bit of, you'll see a little bit of form logic in here because there were certain actions that I didn't want to have happen if the form was in the process of being submitted. So you'll notice that little bit of logic just to give myself a little something I can trigger some conditions on. The actual command itself is very straightforward. If you used qRules prior to 4.2, the command was more complicated. You had to include more parameters. If you're using 4.2 or later and you're still using the older style, where you're doing mapping equals mapping and you're doing ID equals my, whatever. If you're doing this, bad caps, if you're doing anything like that still and you're using 4.2 or later in qRules, I really encourage you. I've got a blog post on InfoPath Dev that talks, it's actually a series that talks about the changes I made for this particular command for 4.2 and later that makes it a lot simpler to use. So do check it out if you're still using kind of the old style syntax. And we support it because we want you to be able to inject with the newer version and not have stuff break. But please, try to move to the new style mapping and the new style syntax if you have a chance to do that. So this command is very straightforward. Everything of interest that's happening here is happening in the mapping, and that's the thing we're going to take a quick look at here. So if we go and define mapping, I'm not going to map this thing. I'm just going to import existing. And if you are using InfoPath 2013 and you've got qRules right now, the mapping tool, it's not going to work very well for you. If you attach your source access in, you're going to get an error. So if you are using InfoPath 2013 and you need a copy of the mapping tool that will work correctly on your machine, it will be included with the next release of qRules, but also just email me. I've got one that's up and working now. It hasn't been through very thorough testing, so I'd be more than happy to share it with people and have them try it. So my email is hilary.stoupa@qdabra.com, or you can email the support alias and we will get you an updated version of this form if you're having trouble with it in InfoPath 2013. So my mapping, look at this. Do you see how I've got a GUID here in my SharePoint list dropdown? That's because this mapping was originally for a different SharePoint site, but I had selected use list name for submit. And that was one of the things that I mentioned originally was these can be pretty easy to move. If you are using the list name for submit, I hope everybody likes looking at XML because I sure do. If you're using usename equals true, then what's going to happen is when we submit to the SharePoint list, we are going to try to submit using this list name instead of the GUID. So now the GUID becomes not so meaningful, right? So if you've got use list name equals true, then we're going to submit based on list name, which means I created a fresh Northwind site, and all I had to change in my mapping for this to work with it was this guy right down here, the SharePoint list URL. Okay, and that is something you can change either by changing the mapping file, or you can add form logic to set that. If you look at the functions in, we're gonna pretend we're adding a formula here. If you look at the functions in InfoPath 2010, you can see we've got a SharePoint site URL function. Okay, and so you can add logic to your form that on open, it sets this field to your site URL. And at that point, as long as wherever you move this form has the same named lists, you have use list name set to true, and you have a rule in your form that is going to go ahead and automatically set that URL in the mapping file. I'll show you one more time. Then you have a form that you can move pretty easily. So that's what I meant when I mentioned that in the demo. Okay, so real quick, sorry, I'm going to run out of time on you guys again. I always do this. I'm so sorry. So if we go look at the mapping, here's where you want to do a little advanced planning. So the thing that I've got going on is when I submit an order, my order needs to have a customer number. But I want to be able, in this form, to create a brand new customer. I want to be able to enter a new customer ID. If I don't have a company here, I want to be able to enter all new information and then be able to submit an order for that new customer. So in order to do that, I need to get back my SharePoint ID for my customer so that I can submit it to my order. Because if we look at our orders table here, our orders table, you can see these are lookups. And since they're lookups, what I have to submit to the customer column is the SharePoint ID from the customer. So if I'm submitting an order for customer around the horn, I need to submit the ID 4 to the customer column here in the orders list, okay? And if I am creating a brand new customer and then creating brand new orders for them, how do I get the ID? It's just simply a matter of submitting things in order, okay? And with qRules, when the code goes through this mapping file, when we look at your mapping here, what qRules does is it actually grabs these and iterates through them, okay? So it's going to iterate through them in the order you've placed them. So that means when you map, especially if you're mapping multiple, nested, repeats, you want to make sure that it's parent, next child, next child, next child, okay? So you want to get these guys properly nested. Now you will see if you look at this that I do have plans for improving this in the future, but at this point I don't have anything in place for this. This is on my to-do list, and I've got it in the schema now because I was planning ahead. So for right now, what you want to do, and this is only qRules 4.2 and ahead, before 4.2 you couldn't submit multiple mappings. It had to be one mapping per submit. So this experience is improved. But you want to get your first parent, then your next child, and your next child, and you want to get them in the order they need to submit. Why? Well, because when I submit the customer stuff, I'm going to populate, if it's a new customer, I'm going to populate that field with the new SharePoint ID for that customer. And then when I come down here and I hit the next mapping and I submit my orders, I am going to submit that SharePoint ID to the customer column. Okay, and if we look at our schema in our form, you can see here's the parent SharePoint ID and here's my order. And in this case, I didn't make order repeating, I just made order details repeating. But the same holds true down here for order details. You can see for order details, I'm going to go back up and grab this SharePoint ID to submit it as the order. Back over we go. So you cannot, the little field picker thing doesn't let you pick parent fields outside of this little repeating group here. So you just have to type in the relative XPath. And it's, and if you've seen one of my crazy videos or webinars before, you've seen me say, look, I actually talk through this. So I know in my mapping I'm on the order node, and I know what I want is up here in the customer node. So from order, I have to go up the tree, which is, right, a ... that's up the tree once, and then I have to go up the tree again to get to customer. Over here, and you can see there's the second ... and now I'm in the customer group, and I can type in the SharePoint ID, and you can see I'm actually mapping a number of higher level fields here from within order. So the important thing to understand, the takeaway here, is if you're going to be mapping these parent items, you need to first off recognize where you're at. Right now you're on order, and you need to recognize where you need to get to. And then I've done the same thing with this guy with the order details, right, to get the parent order number in this case instead of SharePoint ID. So as long as you map in the order you need things and you've mapped IDs, you'll see here that we've marked certain fields as being the ID so that qRules can populate that ID field with the list item ID. The list item ID is this unique integer that never gets reused. Then you can use these pieces of information to link your lists together. Now you've got all these lists. They're linked together. Oh, and if you need more info, if you want a walkthrough, actually look for that qRules 4.2 Submit to SharePoint list walkthrough. It's pretty much exactly the same scenario. There's another video specifically on this that I've got up on YouTube, so you can definitely find more details because I feel like I'm glossing things over a little bit, but you can find more details. You can email me if you're confused or need more advice, or post in the forum. There's lots of ways to get some additional help. So now that we've got all this data, your users who are your business data users who want to be able to report can come to the different lists and export to Excel. Now the one thing about this data, since it is in different lists but connected, is you do have to, if you're going to be using Excel for this kind of reporting, you do have to have a little bit of savvy. For instance, I've got my details in one sheet and my orders are in another sheet, and the order list doesn't include any kind of total. That information is all over here in details. So I've used a sum-if formula to get my order total, and then I've used another formula to get my order with freight. But from there, you can do some powerful things like create some pivot tables, pivot charts, things of that nature that will allow you to slice and dice your data in a more dynamic way. And one of the new tools for Excel that's just come out that I did want to show you is GeoFlow. It's in public preview, so look for the GeoFlow public preview, and when you've got data like this orders data that has postal codes and countries and cities and addresses, you can map it, right? So this is actually a heat map, and you can see I don't have a ton of data, but you can see how it could become very interesting if you did have a ton of data. We can really start looking at where we've got the more interesting pieces of data. You can drill in and take a closer look, and this makes the data, I think, come to life in a very nice way that you're not going to get just with it sitting in a list or so on. So do check out the GeoFlow preview. So my final little tiny demo that's only going to take 1 second is, let me just blast this stuff down. Yeah, more XML. And I encourage you to take a look at the mapping file. And again, I don't mean to keep saying, go look at my blog, go look at my blog. But I did go through kind of what all the notes are in there, because you can do, a lot without necessarily using the mapping tool. You can change values in there using rules. So God, you guys are just like, please stop. So for example, in a case like this where we've got a repeating group, if you had some logic where you wanted to submit these if my employee, not equal blank, right? So you can add an XPath filter here, and you could have typed that in the mapping tool. But the thing that's powerful here is you could also, if you wanted to, change this via a rule in your form. So maybe you sometimes want to submit orders where employee is not equal to blank, but other times you want to submit orders where employee is equal to Nancy, and other times when employee is equal to Joe. This is all stuff you can change with form logic, okay? So I swear I'm done now with that. So this last sample just is to show you DBXL. And here I don't have this form set up to submit. I just have it set up to do some queries, and these are all filtered queries off of a SQL database. So there's times when you really do need or want your data in SQL, or you've got data that's already in SQL that you'd like to be getting into your form. And again, this is a Northwind database, and I'm just populating some stuff, and it's the same general structure. Only in this case, I'm also, select which product you want to see. And so you can do the same kind of filtering. I'm not using a data source that has every single piece of information. Instead, I'm setting a fields value in the web service connection parameters to return only things for this particular customer ID. Okay, I'm going to just open this up. So my query string that I'm setting here, and it's an XML query, I'm basically saying only return the items where the customer ID is equal to this current customer ID. And so this allows me to load only the data I need. So if you've got a massive data set in SQL, this is useful. And the query, we've got a query SharePoint web service as well that can be super useful for complex SharePoint list queries. You know how I mentioned we've got query fields now. Great for equivalency. Well, you cannot do, you know, if date is less than this, but date is greater than that, you can't do that with a SharePoint list query, unfortunately. DBXL has a web service that can do that, so web services make that possible. Also, SharePoint REST connections can allow you some complex querying options. So REST is another thing to look into if that's something you are in need of. And with that, after having gone over, as always, I'm going to say I'm done with my demo, and I'm going to hand things over to Alyssa. Again, I encourage you to get the demo samples and, you know, get in touch, post in the forum, ping me if there's something you've got more information you need on. And while Alyssa goes through the next little slides, why don't you go ahead and feel free, if you've got any immediate questions, to type those up in the question box, and we can do questions right after Alyssa's done.
Thank you, Hilary. So I just wanted to let you guys know a little bit more about what Qdabra has to offer besides just our weekly webinars. So first of all, we have a great community forum, infopathdeb.com, and this is a free support forum. We guarantee a 90% response rate to post questions, and we also have other learning materials here as well, such as blogs, product information, and downloads as well. And so if you're looking for a more urgent support issue, we do have pay-as-you-go support options, so you can certainly check that out on our website. We also take on consulting work. If you have a project you need assistance with, feel free to contact us, and we will definitely be able to assist you. Along with our services, we also have many tools and templates to help you jumpstart your projects, and a great web service as well, Qdabra's DBXL. We offer training courses for different levels of experience, and we offer these both online and in person, just depending on your preference. We have an upcoming training course on May 14th through the 16th, so coming up next week. And there is still time to register, so feel free to reach out to myself or Hilary. And the next online training course would be June 10th through the 16th. So again, I just wanted to let you know a little bit what we have to offer, and thanks so much for a great webinar today, Hilary.
Thanks, Alyssa. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to pop to the next slide. That's on the InfoPath Online. So we've got the classes, so that's information there. Okay, and so let's pop to the questions. So the first question was, somebody asked if the submits are synchronous. We wait for it to complete before we go on to the next one, and that is correct. So what we basically do is, if you have multiple mappings in this mapping file, we take all of the information for the first mapping that submits information to your first SharePoint list, and we submit to that list. And then we submit to the next list after that, and the next list after that. So yes, they are synchronous. The question after that was asking about whether or not DBXL was needed to write to multiple SharePoint lists, and no, actually DBXL doesn't write to SharePoint lists at all really. It can write to libraries, but qRules can write to multiple SharePoint lists, and of course you can always write code for this. You know, there's no reason you can't write submit code that will take your form values and submit it to SharePoint lists. If you're writing code for it, if you're going to be using the form and filler, you'll want to use the update list items web service, or the update list items method of the list web service. If you are going to be running the form in InfoPath Forms services, you can use the SP site object and use the SharePoint object model. The next question was asking about security. This is a great question. Asking if there is any way to set security on a list so that a user can submit through the InfoPath form but would not have permission to access, change the list data. So in the spirit of full disclosure, I will tell you first off that I have not done what I'm about to suggest you try. What I think would work for that would be to use a UDCX connection for your submit. And what I would do then is, if I were to try this, is I would set up an SSO for that UDCX so that the UDCX used the SSO. And then I would lock the list down, and I would allow the only permissions to my SSO to that list, or whatever users that, additional users that I thought. Now you can also include authentication credentials in your UDCX, but I would be a bad dev if I suggested you do anything like store credentials in a UDCX. But yeah, I'm thinking UDCX plus SSO would be a workable approach for that. And if anybody gives that a try, please let me know if it works, and it's on my list of things I want to attempt, but boy, life is short, time is short, right? And the next question was about including attachments when you submit to a SharePoint list. And here I go to my blog, go to my blog. But I do have a blog post on this, because yes, you can. qRules includes functionality for including attachments with your list items. And then you can use the SharePoint web method of delete, I think it's called delete attachment, to even get rid of those list attachments if you want to, make things fun and fancy for your user. So yes, absolutely, we can include attachments. I am not seeing any more questions, so if anybody has another question, feel free to type in "wait" real fast or something like that, and I'll pause for a sec. But hopefully this answered everything. Let us know if the webinar was helpful for you. That helps us make decisions driving forward as far as scheduling and topics and things of that nature. If you have questions about qRules, about InfoPath, do post them on our forum. We try to keep a close eye on that. If you post on the forum and somebody doesn't see you, drop me an email, and a lot of times I'll hop on there and go find your question if you're having trouble getting it answered. And just let us know if there's anything we can help you with your form development. We are here to help, and just hope everybody has a fantastic day. Again, I apologize for going over, but I think for some of you, the minute you saw my name, you knew I would go over. So I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week, a fantastic weekend, and is enjoying spring weather. Thanks so much for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.